I'll repeat the pun because you were all talking, so you didn't hear it. We can all start with the social networking now because we're going to learn about Udon networking. So, my name is Hannah Dawson. You all know me as FSP or FairlySadPanda. I'm 29 years old, and I'm about to tell you everything that you need to know about Udon networking, except the stuff I don't know. So, to break the ice, I think people saw on a channel on the Prefabs Discord the other night. I went, "What the fuck?" And it was about something called is instance owner, and I had completely wrong understanding of what that actually did. And I want you to keep that in mind when I'm talking about this, because stuff like this is complicated. It's okay not to know everything. And my job with this talk is to prepare both technical and non-technical people for people talking about networking and understanding how this works and how you can implement it in your worlds. So I'm going to take a big breath now. Don't panic. We're going to be talking about this, and I'll go to the next slide. So, when I talk about networking, it's a quite complicated topic, and I think it's got a bad reputation. So my background is in networking games anyway, so I've been doing this since pretty much this time last year. I've made shipped 3 completed networking game worlds. I did a version of Codemasters by Czech Games. I've also done a release of Slaughterhouse 1 and Slaughterhouse 2, and I did a talk at the last TLX, of course, about Slaughterhouse 2. And Fiona described that talk as game design, crazy networking complaints, I believe was the term. And I decided that after that talk, I'd do my next talk at TLX on networking, because I don't want to have that situation where it's like there's a special cabal of like me, FaZe Dragon, Centauri, which is why it's funny that we are the people starting this. We're kind of people who know networking relatively well, along with like 10 or 15 other people. And it sometimes feels like networking to everyone else is, what? How? I kind of want to stop doing that. Personally, I'm already done with one of my projects this year. I've got 2 other big projects coming. I've got a big role-playing map called Between Uncertain Stars, which I advertised at the New Year's thing. I've got a spookality entry called You Are the Detectives, both which are network games in very different ways, but using the same fundamental systems, which I might talk about a bit at the end if we've got some time. I also work on VRCon. I'm one of the programmers on it, and I do work for hire for various things as well. And I do want to front end with my real job is as a network server engineer in the video game space at a company called CCP Games. We make EVE Online and a few other things. I'm conscious these videos go on YouTube, and there may be people watching this in a year, maybe work in the games industry already. My company is really good. We're doing a bunch of really cool stuff right now. We are rated Great Place to Work in all 3 of our locations. The Icelandic studio just got, I think it's basically Company of the Year in Iceland. We're a really nice bunch of people. So if you're interested in network games, trust us. We're pretty good at it, and I'd love to have you on board if you're looking for work in the industry. You can take a look at us. We've got the link there to our jobs page. So, Table made this slide, and I really like it, and it sums up everything that's been wrong with 95% of people talking about Udon since it came out. It's the notion that non-technical people, and I hate that term because everyone's technical in some ways, you know, even the least technical person in the world could probably talk about like color theory or something, right? The notion that it's kind of hard to talk about, it's all very technical and it gets very weird very quickly. That's not what my talk is, not the first 20 minutes of it anyway. It's going to be a relatively non-technical, like, here's the ideas, the words you'll hear and what they mean with a few lines of code. It shouldn't spook people. The other half of the talk is the bit where you can all collapse into, like, I don't know, food, like that entropy after big meals where it sort of washes over you, that kind of thing. For the time being, it really isn't as hard as it sounds. And I want to talk about the why for a couple of minutes here, because it's really important to get the principles right first. The big problem with networking is that it's really important to VRChat. Like, Rubik gave a talk yesterday. I'd encourage anyone who's watching this to go rewatch. And Rubik's talk was all about, you know, the reason why interaction is important in VRChat. Interaction is really important, but VRChat, if one half of the word is VR and the VR experience, the other half is chat. It's the human interactions you have. And one of the big problems with VRChat is that when you have a world which is completely unnetworked, people desync. It's important to keep people synchronized, if possible, in their experiences, even late joiners, because it gives you that sense of we're in this together and it's real and you get the immersion of that. Anything that breaks that, even if it's a bad skybox like Rubik said yesterday, can break it. But saying, hey, look at that cool pigeon flying by, and someone can't see that, that can really break immersion in the world, and it makes you feel hollow and false. And there's also obvious things like video games, all the callous row work that FaZe was talking about. You can't do that without a bunch of networking. But there's a problem in networking in that it's kind of hard. And when you're doing networking, sometimes you just sort of think, I could be playing pool in Club B right now. I could be hanging out with my friends, and instead you're sort of staring at like networking diagrams. Networking has a reputation for breaking easily. I mean, we've all been to community meetups or other quick equivalent events where networking has just exploded and we've all crashed. And ultimately, if you're a non-technical person, it sometimes feels like you could be doing something you're better at. Like, if you're an artist, why should you learn networking code? Like, get a networking person on board or don't bother. Or if you're a level designer, you can do some amazing levels, which are completely non-networked. I mean, there's so many good examples, particularly in the sort of the Japanese community, these completely non-networked worlds with no real, like, interaction between players at all beyond maybe a synced pickup, and they're still beautiful worlds, so why would you bother? And my point is that, really, there is a balance there to be made. You don't have to be like FaZe and write a billion networking systems for a really complicated world, and you don't have to be like some stereotypical like 2017, 2018 like no network interaction world, right? Sometimes you see a lot of these community meetups as well, where it's like, I've done all this 3D art, I haven't done the networking code yet. You don't have to be that way either. It's got to be somewhere in the middle, and really it's not even somewhere in the middle, it's as little as possible to fake that you've done way more work than you actually have. It's as little as possible. That's the reason why pool tables are so great, because you can just throw it in the world and suddenly the world's networks, because you can do stuff together. Isn't that great? And it comes down to, I want to talk about, that's the principles. So I'm going to talk actually about now the what, not the principles, but the how. So don't do too much networking, and when you do networking, remember the Triforce. And the funny thing about this is that I was watching Momo the Monster's video on the sort of basics of networking, the 5-minute one. He actually has the same diagram as this. He's standing there and he goes like, here's the 3 things you need to know, but it was upside down, and it wasn't a triangle, it was 3 pieces of text. And I went, he's accidentally stolen my slide. What the flip? So mine's got like a funny reference to Zelda on it, so you can remember this. But the 3 basic principles here. At the top, ownership. Second one, synced variables. The third one is custom network events. And that sounds like big jargon. I'm going to go through all of this. But you just need to remember there's 3 things you need to remember. They work together, but they are logistically quite separate in how you use them. But to make one big networking world, you use them all together. So they're kind of 3 separate topics that are intertwined under the umbrella of networking. And the big one you need to get right, because the one that most frequently breaks, is ownership. Ownership is a notion of owning something. Now, an instance is owned. You know, somebody creates the instance and they go in for the first time and they're the instance owner. They can always rejoin the instance, for example. That's not this. Someone's always the master. Well, that is this, because what the master means is they're the default owner. Every single thing in this world we're in right now is owned by something. So, for example, let's take a look at the screen behind us. It's probably got a Udon behavior on it. It's going to be owned probably by Orals, whoever created an instance, because it's probably not been transferred. Or maybe it has been under the surface. But it doesn't just have to have an Udon behavior. It's anything which is in network instance, network controlled. So that's Udon behaviors and object syncs are the big 2. I'll get onto the latter of those in a bit. But also things like object pools and a few other minor things have got network ownership properties on them because they can be bossed around by somebody or other. What ownership just means is somebody owns it, and that's federated control over the instance. So everybody knows who owns everything. And you can own things, you can transfer ownership to other people, and you can use that to boss around what kind of happens to that object in the scene. Basically, it's, I am the boss of this object. Like, I have this apple in my hand, it is mine. I'll ask poor Yorick to mix up that quote. Ownership is sort of automatically transferred most of the time. And it happens in every single VRChat world. If you ever give someone a pickup, it's synced. That's ownership transfer. Synced pickups are owned by the person who last held them. Object sync objects can actually transfer ownership when you hit somebody with them. If you throw it to them, it will actually transfer ownership to them. This actually, I don't see many people using, but it's a feature that's kind of commonly comes up all the time, and it used to be a #1 reason why worlds exploded. Fortunately, thanks to the Uno update, that is less of a problem now, but everyone remembers going to a community meetup or something like that, and you get that big kicked from instance because the instance has exploded. Object ownership blew up. That doesn't happen anymore, but it's something to be aware of. Usually check the checkbox off. And if somebody, I said that instance owner, this is, remember I said earlier, I got this wrong, it's actually the master. If someone leaves their world, their object goes back to the owner. So if you are the master, so if you are holding this apple and then your internet gets pulled, or you're shagging money over there, and Elon Musk decides that you must go bye-bye for 5 minutes, you can just go pop and your object will just fall to the floor and it goes back to the master of the world. That's the person who came in first. In Udon terms, it's the person with the lowest order ID in the world, generally speaking. So, I promised you there'd be very little code. That is very little code. That's one line. If you guys start screaming, I'm sorry, I can't help you. But basically, we're talking about setting an owner. That's kind of one action we do in ownership transfer. And we generally say, who do you want to set it to? You might say the local player. That's what that next bit means. And then game object. Well, what do you want to set? You do this in Graph. The same will probably work in Cyan triggers, though I haven't personally used that. But it works most commonly in Udon Sharp, and it's just that. That's how you tell somebody, I'm holding an apple, I'm going to put the apple on the floor, I'm going to run this piece of code, you now own the apple. Dead easy. And you can actually check who owns the apple with either an isOwner check or a getOwner check. Both of these are in Graph, they're called exactly the same thing as networking getOwner. And they'll just go, hey, do we own this item? Or who own, does this player own the item, yes or no? Or or who owns this item? Just give me the person who owns it back. So you can do a query to say yes or no, or just to give me the person. You can do the check yourself. They do functionally the same thing. Should be noted that ownership is pretty fast in transfer these days, but it will lag a little bit. So if you do a set owner, or if somebody else was a set owner on something, there's that network delay until you actually hear about it. That's probably one of the most important things you need to get right in your networking world, and it's unfortunately one of the things you have to sort of test for yourself. I can't help you with that. It's just keep that in mind at all times. Networking means stuff will happen in a bit for everybody. But when you talk about, oh, here's ownership, one of the problems with it is that people start going, well, why? Like, I don't need to care about this. It's all been hidden by VRChat. The white circle, the post-processing is kind of nuking this, but the yellow face on the left-hand side is the owner of the object. This is what I'm doing. I'm moving the apple from here to here. And the person on the right might see those orange smiley faces, see the object move from A to B, and you might have done something else to the object via some method. To change the color of the object. You did that. You can now see it elsewhere. I usually call this replication, which is an Unreal Engine term, but it's the same kind of thing. You're replicating the state of the object from owner to everybody else in the scene. That's why you do it. So, the first thing you build on top of your ownership, beyond just object sync, and I knew my hip tracker would go insane today. It had to. It's going to definitely. Right. So, the first thing you need to do is custom network events. So a custom network event is something that you'll very quickly get used to if you're working in Udon Graph, because everything is an event in Udon Graph. You sort of just fire off events to other graphs, other behaviors, and just go, just do this, just do this, just do this. The problem with Udon Sharp in some ways is the fact that it kind of hides that. So you don't really learn about events until you start doing custom network events. You're like, what's an event? What is this? It turns out that's what Udon Sharp's been doing under the surface. An event is just a string which says, this Udon behavior, run this protocol on this behavior, just do this. You will have something on that system which does this, just want to run this. And you can do that over the internet. There are jargon terms for this. One term is really common is RPC, which is remote procedure call. And technically, it's a kind of shitty RPC, but it is an RPC in some ways. But what it just means is that everybody connected to the instance at that point where you fired off the RPC, off this event, is going to hear about you want to do this, and it will run on their side just as if you'd run it locally. So you just say, hey, open this door, or run my cool event in this case. By the way, if I see any more code examples of people not using name of in their code, please use this in Udon Sharp. Merlin put it in for a reason. It's really good. Imagine you do semantic links in your code. Please use this. I see a lot of people using magic strings, and it's one of the reasons why things just explode for you, and you start crying to me. But what that is ultimately,
you know what they call me.
An event is just. I think Cyan originally requested this. I can't remember. I think it was the middle of last year. But yeah, you can only trigger so in Udon Sharp, you can only trigger public functions. So that's just an event in a public function is an event in Udon Graph, but in Udon Sharp it is a public function, and the event cannot start with an underscore. Who here's been in a world which has been exploited by a client user? Kind of sucks. You can arbitrarily call any custom event, not just network event, custom event, because they're the same thing in your world if you don't prepare with an underscore the event name. Please do so. Always unless you want to be called over the internet, always call every single event in your world underscore something. Don't have to do it for private functions in Udon Sharp. Please do that. That's like one of the things you take from this talk. If you're like a technical person, please do that. Use name of and underscore. They're technical standards we should always be applying to our worlds. But the thing about custom network events is you can only trigger public ones. It means that if you're doing like a bunch of stuff privately on Sharp, which is just a bunch of semantic sugar, then it will not really work. So you have to do publics. I think everybody's been hit by this when I talk to them. Like, oh, it didn't work. Oh, it was private. But one thing I want to highlight is that ownership of an object is very closely linked into custom network events, because one of the cool things we used to do a bunch before we got Udon, the Udon networking update, is that not the owner of the object can fire off to everybody else in the instance using any instance of Udon behavior, any event on that object. So not the owner in this case is going to trigger open door. And everyone else is going to go, including the owner of the object, is going to go, oh cool, you said open door, I'm going to make the door open now. You said closed door afterwards, make the door closed. The door's already closed, and you said closed door. Well, that's a no-op. The door's already closed, I'm not going to do anything. Which is generally how you should run these network events anyway. Don't run them like toggle, for example, because then people get very desynced and weird. You want to do something which is definitive, this has happened. It's the thing with events. You know, the door opens everybody. Oh, unless, of course, you know, you've broken the world somehow and something's crashed. The thing about it is there's two different kinds of RPCs, these events. The first of these is all, network event target all, and there's also network event target owner. All and owner are pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, somebody owns the object you're calling. If you set it to owner, what happens is that only the owner will interpret that event. They'll actually still receive the information, they'll just ignore it. It will still actually go to them, so it actually causes network load even if you're calling owner. Fun fact, we had a bug in the middle of last year which broke my world for 2 days because of it. I think it was 2 days, it was about a day, somewhere around that, man. But a great example of that is, I want to start the game, but I don't own the game we're trying to play. Hey, can I start the game? I'm going to send a command saying start game. The owner then goes, well, I have all the data locally. I think we've got 5 players, the cards are in the right place, no one's currently playing the game, you know, and, you know, Mercury's in retrograde, so we can start the game, right? And that's really powerful. And it's basically how Slaughterhouse 2 works, funnily enough, and all my stuff, I think pretty much everyone else's games of last year have worked like that. It's kind of like these command event patterns, one of which I talked about in my last talk. The problem is, as I also talked about in my last talk, custom network events are dog shit in so many ways. They are slow. 0.5 seconds or more. They can take 3 or 4 seconds the round trip. They are unstable. If you have a spotty internet connection, it probably will. It has no guarantee it will arrive. It almost certainly will. VRChat's pretty good at this, but there's no guarantee. So sometimes you just get events being dropped. And the big one, the one that caused people to not develop an Udon for over a year, hi Cyan, is network catch-up and just basically not happening for people that join the world afterwards. In SDK 2, there was a way of doing events that just got buffered to people afterwards. I fully understand why that's not in SDK 3. That's a huge, like, complicated event buffer ledger system, which is a good way of doing things if you have, like, really big servers and lots of money. But for little baby instances of like 18 kilobytes a second network transfer, I can see why it's a problem. So the thing about CNEs is that they're useful, really, really, really useful. Use them. They're really easy and flexible and agile ways of doing development quickly if you don't need to do much data sync. But sync variables are better. And I wouldn't have said that before I came out to this talk today a week ago, because Udon networking update hadn't come out. I've been working in that update for about 6 months now. Before, we only had one kind of sync variable. We now have 2. And these 2 sync variables are really handy in different ways. And one of them is dramatically more handy than the other. They're a bit complicated, so bear with me. A variable, I think you guys know what they are. If you don't, a variable is something that sits inside your Udon behavior. There are 2 basic kinds, syncable and unsyncable, basically in terms of networking. Syncable objects include a string, a position, a vector free in the world. So I'm currently a vector free in this world, a free XYZ coordinate, that's a vector free. An integer array of player IDs related to, say, people who've signed up to my game to play it. Right? Those things are syncable. They're able to be taken, packaged into some kind of arbitrary zeros and ones, and fired over the internet to everybody else. There are things which aren't syncable. For example, suppose I've just decided to store in my object a specific player API, a specific person, a way of talking about that person in Udon. You can't sync that directly. You can't sync Udon behaviors we might be calling. you can sync things which are interpreting. Take a look at my slide again. You see how I've got a specific player API there, but on the left-hand side I've got an integer array of player IDs. This is the kind of thing that you have to start thinking about. How do I represent what I've got locally to everybody else for the things I need them to know about? So in this way, you don't send over somebody's Udon player API, you send over the ID of their player API. And that's basically what we're talking about with a manual sync and continuous sync of variables. A bit more code, I do apologize.
You can use the laser pointer to point things out.
All right. I like pointing at the screen. I like doing it. All right. You see our happy owner face, the little yellow guy? He's saying, I want to set favorite number to be 3. In Udon chart, we might just flag this as a private integer called favorites number. And we're going to have that be changed arbitrarily via a button could do this. Quite a lot of different things can do this in the world. Usually you want to call like a small Udon behavior that can do generic setting and getting of objects. And you just have a public function, again in Udon chart, or just a event in Udon graph called set favorite number. And you want to set a number somehow. Again, in graph, you just have a variable. You set program variable to it. First thing you want to do when you're syncing variables, make sure the object you are trying to sync on is owned by yourself. And this now happens instantly in the Udon networking update. It didn't before. It took a frame or so, and it was terrible. But now it actually works instantly, which is fantastic. It works instantly. It fakes it, but it generally is fine. Networking set owner, just claim the ownership of the object yourself. Then, afterwards, get your number you're inputting, set your manually synced, in this case, favorite number to be the number you want to change it to. Then you want to call something called request serialization. Request serialization just means, hey, take the synced, everything marked as Udon synced in this piece of code, in our graph or in our pretty much anything you can write on Udon, and just say, everything that's synced, take that, store it as ones and zeros in a nice compressed way, like in a zip file, and just fire it to everybody else in the instance. As if by magic. You don't do anything else, it will just dispatch it. Unless you've decided to sync a really large amount of data. In which case, it will explode, as you would expect. And afterwards, you might want to call handle serialization yourself. I've got an example of a pattern later on, which is quite handy for this. For everyone else in the instance, they're going to call the same piece of code again. They're going to do something called on deserialization list. I will mention this again later. And you got basically a piece of code saying, hey, I want to do something with this favorite number. Let's just do that. And for everybody else, they're going to say, okay, I got favorite number over the internet. I'll update this piece of string to say I've changed this number. And it just works. And what's great about it is it works for everybody, including Mr. I joined your instance late because I was walking my dog, and the person who's there right now. And, of course, it updates it for the owner. Even if the owner wasn't the owner before they assigned the ownership, it'll update it. I've got a mention of something called data racing a bit later, which will go into some more detail. Generally speaking, this is how it works. As I said earlier, there are 2 kinds of networking, manual and continuous. Manual is, I suppose, is a good way of doing it as a postman analogy. Manual is me sending you a letter through the post, and a little bit later, a really fast, like he's been trained by the Flash, the postman knocks on your door with like a letter and throws it to you, and you read the letter and quickly scribe it into your computer. That's basically what's happening there. That's like one postman doing that. And that postman goes back to the post office, and we'll do that for late joiners later. Because the postman's really good, they're unionized, they get loads of days off a year, so they work really well. Continuous sync is what happens when you decide that your lovely post office workers that you've been really treating very well, you're going to take away all of their days of holiday, and you're going to basically make them work until they fall over, and it's a bit shit. It's for specific use cases. The funny thing about Udon is that we use manual sync now for pretty much everything, and it's really good. But continuous sync is how everything else in VRChat basically works. Look to my hand for a second. So I'm tracing it over the world. That's not what's actually going on. In continuous sync, what happens is that it just keeps spamming the network saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, every quarter of a second or so, provided the network's not loaded. It syncs less data more often. It works just like your hand waving in VRChat works. In VRChat, what actually happens, like every other networked program which does this, basically takes a snapshot every 0.25 seconds and basically tells you, hey, this person moved their hand from here to here, and this is the change between them. And what Phase was talking about was interpolation. That's basically the act of going from, well, I have this old data and this new data. How do I make it look like I'm not doing this and just snapping immediately? Well, you do a nice curve instead. That's what's going on with continuous sync. It's all about lagging behind a bit to keep the nice interpolation moving smoothly. That's what it's kind of for. And it's why it's been so shit to work with for the last year, because it's not what we want out of network data at all. Like, it's completely the wrong system. It's using a bicycle for mass public transport. You can have like 500 people in a gigantic bicycle queue, but at some point it's just easy to use a bus. It's what's called lerping of values, by the way, is the jargon. I believe there's a reason why it's called lerp. It's short for something. I'm not a mathematician, but I know it's a mathematical term.
Interpolation.
Thank you. Okay. Linear interpolation. But yeah, like I said, it's basically how everything works. I mean, it's kind of rubbish. It's useful for certain things. The problem is, because I just said, imagine, by the way, I said, moves from here to here, right? So what's actually happening under the surface in VRChat is that when you move from here to here, the computer already knows it needs to make the object be here. It just really wants to make sure that it smoothly gets from here to here. That's the stupid thing about this. Have you ever done a teleport of a player in VRChat and you've set teleport to off, like instant to off, and they've kind of like shot off? It's because it's desperately trying to make this animated, but it doesn't need to be. And there's so many worlds currently in Udon where this kind of is problematic. But fortunately, we've got this system now. The big thing that Udon continuous sync is useful for is a way of very quickly accessing it called object sync, which, as I've got on the slide, is basically the definition of it. A component allows for position or rotation and actually scale. I learned that from something Momo mentioned a little while ago. And a few related things to be synced easily. It's just, I already know I want this object to be synced. It needs to be to pick up. It needs to be able to move easily. I don't want to write the goddamn code for this. I don't want to be phased and write my own interpretation system. Just work. Just work. Go. Which means that VRC pickup plus object sync, smash them together, throw it in the oven. It works. Ship it, right? You can also, but the thing about Udon object sync, the reason why it's really cool, we already had this in the old version of Udon networking. It was on the actual Udon behavior. If anyone's ever done that, you go into Udon behavior, you attach no behaviors to it, which doesn't make any sense. Why is it like this? But you just go, hey, sync position, and it works. It's great. Fantastic. But you couldn't actually do anything with it other than just say, hey, it's synced. Now you can. It's fantastic. Move a synced object to a target location without lerping it. You can actually do that in continuously. You can just tell the game, hey, I got that snapshot of the old hand position and the new hand position. Guess what? This time, and only this time, make it snap. Did anyone here remember me having that sort of mental breakdown about teleports in my Slaughterhouse 2 1 and 2 worlds, where it just horribly broke for several months? I was bitching about it endlessly until I had like a rigid body revelation where you could just sort of stick it in a location. That's because it was constantly trying to lerp for remote. You can actually just use teleport to as a shortcut for this, but flag discontinuity is basically to stop that happening. If you're using object sync and you're doing anything at all involving moving an object sync object via some teleport, sticking it in a dog's mouth. Oh, where's Centauri? Is Centauri here? This is something I was talking about the other day. Sticking it in a dog's mouth and moving it. Anything like that, where it's being moved, but in a teleporty way, or being updated or controlled by another object, which may not be networked, use flag discontinuity. Otherwise, your object will float behind you, and it is terrible and looks bad. It basically switches off that lerping stuff for a little bit, while still spamming the network with that vector-free update. Respawn. Actually just a useful health function. You can actually do this anyway. If you've ever done a situation where you've gone, I'm going to get this pickup. I'm going to move the pickup to minus 20,000 and put it under the floor so far that it forces a respawn because the game thinks it's fallen out of the world. That's all this is doing, just with extra syntax. It's just a bit nicer. Set gravity and set kinematic is the Vogan VR complaints. Because I think Vogan has complained about these two the most, but I've had the same issue, where you couldn't properly set, hey, is this supposed to be gravity or kinematic, and sync pickups to kind of just explode? And you're like, why is it I set this to kinematic and then stood on it and I got launched to space? Like, can I contact Elon Musk for a donation? This would be like a rocketless way of getting us to space. This kind of stuff is to do with again, a lot of what VRChat's doing internally. It makes it really hard for synced pickups to like have their gravity and kinematic status synced normally. So you have this function now. Basically, if you're going to take another useful thing from this slide for technical people, this is a useful slide to have. These 5 functions are all really useful, and you should probably learn what each of the functions do. I want to talk about one final script before I go on to my advanced bit of the talk, and this is the actual like stuff that's in UNU or is in networking we already have. Not like ways of using it in interesting ways, but this is the final useful thing I want to talk about. And it's actually something which is I think most people are going to overlook, I think, sadly. And it's VRC Object Pool, which is a script that controls a set of objects. You can use the pool to switch between pooled objects switch pooled objects on and off everybody. And you're like, okay, so I can use it to spawn boxes like in Momo's tutorials, or I can use it to spawn a player controller, maybe? Like, it's actually incredibly useful for pretty much anything which involves instantiating objects, player controllers, any instance where you need to have something be synced over the network, but you don't want to have it on all the time. You want to have it on when somebody needs it, or it needs to be used for some reason. And you just have it off elsewhere, and it's in a pool. And the great thing about it is it's basically Udon free. You don't have to write it yourself. Face Dragon's got a really good in Udon player pool, object pool, which I think Centauri and a number of people use. I've used it as well for Slaughterhouse. That works out really well, and it's actually lower network latency than this. But the VRC Object Pool just works, and I think it's a great example as a VRChat team kind of knowing how we use networking and trying to write scripts that aid us. Both this and Object Sync are both, like, I think, to be really good examples of this. So a great example of object pool sync, of course, is having cubes and being able to spawn a cube down in front of you, yada yada yada. I use it for inventory systems. So I have like an inventory that goes out to each player. And what I do in my inventory system is I attempt to, again, object pools are synced objects, so they need to be claimed by ourselves before we do anything. Grab the pool object and call try to spawn, called exactly the same thing in graph. And hey, did we get anything from the pool? All that means is, hey, we have 30 things in this pool, and somebody's pressed the button to spawn 30 things. What happens? Well, it just means it doesn't return anything. You don't get a pool object back. But for everybody else, they'll see that 30 things are in the world, and 30 things which sync over the network via network latency, via late joining. So it works just like manual sync. It just replicates correctly to everybody when you load into the world, which is fantastic. It means that things stay consistent and pretty much code-free, which you should just use it. When you want to give an object back to the pool, again, because it's synced, you need to claim it, and then you go pool.return and just pass the object back in. And as long as the object's in the pool, it just works. Boop, gone. Really, really useful script. Again, I'd recommend everybody who is doing this kind of stuff, check it out and think what you can use it for. So now I'm going to do the dreadful, sort of scary bit.
Wait.
Here is the advanced section.
We weren't.
So I want you to imagine it's the day after, it's Thanksgiving. You've eaten the 4th portion of mashed potato. You're listening to your aunt talk about some dreadful, just fall asleep. I promise you won't miss anything interesting. Yeah, just lie down. It's fine. Okay. Data racing. One of my favorite things as a network engineer and a server engineer. So, let's talk about... Remember when I said networking events were kind of shit? I said this, right? Network events kind of rubbish. They don't really replicate out to people after they join. They're kind of slow. You can't send any data with them. You can kind of go, do this. But imagine being I don't know, again with that postman analogy, right? The postman runs to your front door, gasping, out of breath. He's been 2 minutes late because the network's under load. He passes you a piece of paper, and the paper says, Among Us on it, without any context. So if you got that 2 minutes ago, you'd have known, oh, it's the funny Among Us meme. We just spawned the funny Among Us meme. But it's 2 minutes later, and everyone else has left the instance, and you just get this, and you're like, this is useless to me. I have no context. So an event's contextless. So, given this, they're no data and they're slow, can we make manual sync work like them? I mean, manual sync is basically just you can fire things over the network and you can send that data. Should we even receive that data, we can just do things with it. Well, maybe before we do any of that, let's go and just, okay. So, events are slower than manual sync. Manual sync's really fast. I should have mentioned that a bit. Manual sync's really fast. It'll just work properly. As long as the network's not under load, it'll just go done as quickly as possible, half a second max. It's great. So if custom events take longer than manual sync, just sync a variable, then call an event, and everything is fine. The event will show up, the fat postman will show up after the thin postman, horses in the hair, right? And then the fat postman will give you the letter saying Among Us, and you know that it meant say the word Among Us 12 times, I don't know, and everything's fine. Until networking. Sometimes bad things happen on the internet. I know. It's not just Elon Musk tweeting something cringe on Twitter. Sometimes your internet goes down for a minute because Frontier decides to fuck over with you, or because somebody decided to slice a network cable in the Atlantic. Sometimes networking doesn't work properly. And sometimes what you thought would happen first, which is getting the data, actually happens second. And what happens is you get a please understand moment. Oh, it broke. I think I could say this with Photon. A really good example right now is actually what I think is going on with the portals in VRChat. Have you ever seen a portal just disappear for no reason? Like, that person just walked through the portal. 2 people just walked through and it disappeared. What's going on there is it's updating sort of information about the world on the fly, and sometimes data it should have had when it spawned the portal it didn't have. So, for example, if a portal is spawned and a few players are nearby, what I think happens with portals, sometimes they go, I've just spawned this, but I just found out that person who was actually, I thought over there, was actually here because they move really quickly. So they were too close to the portal, so I'll just shut it down. What's actually happened is that person was running through the portal, and it's things like that. Because networking is quite kludgy, and sometimes things come out of order, and sometimes you make the wrong decision. So one thing you need to do with networking is make sure that this happens as little as possible. And the best way to do that is package things that should go together up in one thing. So don't do things like package a variable separately from the event that's related to the variable. Try and keep your contexts together. When you give somebody, say the word Among Us, give them the number of times to say it at the same time. It sounds obvious, but it's amazing how often this goes wrong. Here is roughly an example of how you use manual events, and actually continuous synced events as well, but I usually use manual, to do things. Let's take a look at this slide. There are 3 events, so things that automatically happen, which are driven back to your Udon behavior when stages in the serialization process happen. The first of these is we've just sent a request serialization, and we're going to go prepare to get that data and send it outwards. That's called pre-serialization. And it's really useful for some worlds. I don't generally tend to use it, but it's actually quite handy for certain things, like if you want to, say you want to make something happen, but you don't want to happen yet, but you know you want to update a bunch of data, on pre-serialization gives you the opportunity to get the data into your correct state before you serialize it. Post-serialization has suddenly got dramatically more interesting with the Udon networking update, because it has something called serialization result in it, which is mostly a result of BD bitching, and it's a really good bitch. We all should bitch to developers when we have problems, because basically BD went on the canny and basically made a very loud angry noise about the fact there was no information at all about how well the network was coping. And I didn't want to say anything because I only sync like a kilobyte of data at a time. BD was synchronizing like 50 kilobytes of data and was like, I can't stop this from spamming people's network. Can you do anything? And even though BD is correct in that this isn't completely solved, this is at least an improvement. On post-serialization, it gives you something called a result, serialization result back, same as in graph. You'll get this from the node. And you'll go, hey, is the result, did we serialize this successfully? Or was Mercury in retrograde? You know, did something bad happen to Photon? Like, did we, more and more seriously, did we flood the buffer of everything we can actually send, which is about 18 kilobytes total, about 4 or 5 kilobytes per item, I think. Did that work? If no, you can actually handle that and do something. Otherwise, just sort of, in this case, I'm marking this as dirty, quote unquote, so I can do stuff a bit later. This is from Udon string events work. The final one is the most important. I've already shown it off. On deserialization. First 2 of these, as my little man, happy man smiling there shows, first 2 of these happen only for the owner of the object. They're the ones serializing. But they don't actually receive on deserialization, because why should they? They're serializing, not deserializing. Great gotcha. Fantastic gotcha. It'd be wonderful to have this just unified, so just have this as like one event which everyone fires, but it's not the way it's been written, and it's kind of technical debt at this point. On deserialization means everybody else, whenever they get it, late joiner, currently here, the network's been spotted, they just come back, that kind of thing, they'll get this data eventually. On deserialization, just do stuff with that data. That's the sort of way of eventing this properly. And I did mention before one really good habit to get into, and that is doing this. Request serialization and immediately calling handle serialization afterwards. Calling handle serialization afterwards to do stuff like, hey, I've just synced all this data, but pretend I'm someone who's receiving this data, action the data I've just received. So you have like a write and then a read. And everyone else does the read, but you do the write and then the read. Actually works out really well and keeping your code kind of clean. So I'd really recommend doing this particular thing. So this means you're changing what the last thing was, which was that the owner syncs and everyone else handles, to the owner syncs and handles. 9 times in 10 you want to do this. So here's another example of fun things you can do in Udon with the networking update. Suppose you've got a clown. Clowns like honking. The clown wants to honk a horn at a specific location. So they want to make sure that everyone else in the instance, because the clown is very insistent, they can't just use a network event for this. It needs to be as fast as possible. It can't be delayed because somebody's spamming the network with the word Among Us 500 times. It has to happen immediately, as fast as possible. So the clown is going to use honk location to do this and sync a vector free. Everyone else in the instance, we're going to have them hear the honk at the right location as quickly as possible, because they're going to use on deserialization, go, oh, the vector 3 of this honk location has been updated from A to B. Well, there's been a change in it, so obviously that means we should then make the honk at this location, right? The problem is that the people who join later get that new data anyway, and they go from having no information about prior honks to all of the information about the last honk, even if the last honk was 4 hours ago. This obviously is not correct, and they will just hear random shit happening around them. So one thing you need to worry about with manual sync is there's no way of stopping you receiving manual sync data for a few seconds after joining. You don't know if the data is what's referred to as stale or not. That is, remember there's always a context to data you're receiving. Data can be stale, data can be fresh, and sometimes you're okay with stale data because 20 minutes ago 5 people signed up to the game and they haven't left, so we still want to see those 5 people when we join the world. But if you hear something which is actually stale and you're using events to do this because it's faster, or you can send data with it, you have to have some way of stopping that flagging, and we can do that really interestingly in Udon networking update. We can use a function which has been mostly ignored till now called networking.get server time in milliseconds, and we can sync the amount of time, of, according to the relay server, what time is it currently in milliseconds. It's actually in seconds, but it's encoded as milliseconds. So the last 3 digits are always 0. It'd be really nice to have this fixed, but for now, you get it to a second resolution. Even though so it's basically get to the time in milliseconds, except not. It's great. I love it when we find weird stuff in the background, which probably no one's touched this code in like 5 years. It's great. So we're going to say, okay, activate time and do a trigger or whatever, and then request serialization. This is like firing. I think it's firing a gun. This. No, it's firing a honking noise in the world. And then for everybody else, they're going to go, hey, the server said when I fired this on my end, or the other person's end, the server time was 5, right? 5 seconds. It's now 65 seconds, which is like a minute later. So we know this is stale, we can ignore it. This is actually a really good way of handling this. It's relatively stable. It's a good, quickly way of doing this. This is actually a really powerful function. I'll talk about it in a second, but this is an okay way of doing it, but thankfully during the Udon networking update, we actually got a really nice way of doing which is better, which is send custom event delayed seconds, which is one of the nice things I do think the VRChat devs are listening to about this, which is just a really useful little function. And what this does is it's going to go, and occasionally hilariously broken. Everyone knows what bug there was the other day about send custom event delayed. It was fantastic. I saw all the things being spawned. Well done, Varnian. Those Lakusa dolls probably should have crashed you. I don't know how they didn't. Send custom event delayed seconds, name of activate, works just like sending an event or sending a network event, except you got this little number at the end. Hey, send it in 2 seconds. You do this with frames as well. I generally find seconds is more useful than frames personally, but each their own. We can say, okay, it doesn't mean start. So just like in graph, same thing, you do a start node and go to send custom event delayed seconds. Okay, so first few seconds after we start the world, just ignore any updates we get. Just let it settle in the background. This isn't guaranteed, but it's actually a really nice, simple way of doing this. If you're doing events to kind of drive actioning things as quickly as possible using on deserialization, etc., you can sort of let things settle before going in. Is that guaranteed to work? No, because Photon may tell you to please understand, or you may have the Mercury in retrograde, something may happen, but it's a pretty good system for this kind of thing, for non-essential work, right? And that's the great thing about this, ultimately. It's like, we're doing a manual thing to do kind of things which are really done with events, but because we want to kind of handle things in nice ways, you can make it work like an event very well. What was the next slide? So, yes. This is something I wanted to talk about as a cool example of using get server time in milliseconds. So, who here has been to Sentinel's World Midnight Lounge? Hands up. Midnight Lounge. We're all there. It's Moonlight Lounge. Yes, Sentinel's really nice world with the jazz theme world. 1980. Who is joined 30 minutes into a running instance of Moonlight Lounge with people already there? And who's here's gone, hey, I really like this song, and everyone else has gone, what song? It's desynced. I can't tell. I love that. I love the soundtrack in that particular map, but it's not synced. Table, at their talk yesterday, mentioned a really emotional moment that happened because of the accidental sync, because everyone joined about the same time, and the music player was in about the same amount of time. So this is a really good example of a small amount of networking you do to get a really big impact. Make the music players in your world synced. So when people join the world, they're about a second desync between them, but if the beat drops at one point, the beat will drop at about the same point for everybody else. You can all go ooh at the same time. And I'm not an expert on Unity timeline and animations, but I'm pretty sure the same principle applies for those. So Lon, if you're watching, wherever you may be, or where you may watch this, think about using something like this for your next time you're doing a giant concert and people have to hit a button to start it. This would actually possibly be really useful in timeline, but I'm not an expert there. What we're doing is using get server time in milliseconds to tell us, hey, we started something at something given time. That's a music player in this instance. And over here, we are going source.time, just convert it to a Uint64, and just get the server time milliseconds we locally have, and just get, hey, what time does this actually happen? And then just jump forward in the song until, hey, this started on this person's PC 30 seconds ago. That means let's start the music from here 30 seconds in. If I saw people doing this in Worlds and music was synced, it would make me so happy, because it's so annoying to hear a song and no one else is hearing the same thing at the same time. Remember the very first slide of why I said networking is important? Social interaction. This is a great example of social interaction being used for everybody in the instance, and it will just work, and it's really easy, so please use it.
Prefab.
Second thing I want to talk about. Pickups. FaZe has already talked about pickups quite a lot, and I am still in awe that FaZe got their system working. I'm not talking about really advanced stuff. There's like a bit at the end I can talk about if you guys want, but pickups are, other than music players, I think pickups are such a common thing in Worlds. Everybody uses them. Rubik's talk yesterday. Pickups are really important. Please use them. So the thing about pickups is that, let's just say we want to have a gun which shoots people and can respawn. So we go, I don't know, let's just start off with a basic example. Let's make it so when you do pickup use down on the pickup where you're holding it, it just calls a network event and then makes the thing go bang on everyone else's screens, right? And there's 5 bullets in the gun. Let's not sync the bullets at all. So as soon as you see it shoot 5 times, it will start clicking for you if you carry on holding down it. And as long as everybody was in the instance at the start, generally speaking, it'll be fine. Except, of course, the funnel thing of someone else joins the instance 2 minutes late and suddenly they see they've got 3 bullets in the gun. You've actually shot 5 because they didn't see the first 2 bullets fire, and everything is terrible. Things are desynced. Your networking has fallen over. People do not have as much fun as they should do. So you go, well, that's obvious. I'll get the behavior that's governing the behaviors of the gun, and I'll just manually... Oh, I can't do that in Udon. A manually synced pickup... manually synced Udon behavior cannot live on the same object as a continuously synced pickup. We're using object sync or a continuously synced Udon behavior. You can only have one or the other on an object. So you go, oh god, this is impossible, what is going on? So what you start doing is this instead. And this is one of the things you have to get into the mind of using all the systems together. Sometimes you want to use manual sync, sometimes you want to use continuous sync by object sync and other methods, and sometimes you want to use both together, or all 3 together. In this case, you can just say, hey, let's have gun manual sync, which is a manually synced version of the gun prefab, or our gun, and just fire stuff in that, and have the 2 Udon behaviors cooperate to deliver the correct behavior to your user. And I think I've already mentioned this, so I might skip through this slide quite quickly, but remember to use teleport to rather than set position and rotation for synced objects. Because if you see horrid slow lerping, like this, it's crap. It's awful. Instead, what you want to do is you want to have the object move from here, and it's an instantly transmission over to the other side like this. So that's basically what's going on. You just start from here, you want to go to there, use teleport to, and that can actually be really done very simply. If you don't have to store the object sync in the world, you just get component and do it. Rank credits Orals for spotting that and getting that in, because he very nearly missed that, and I would cry if that extremely lame joke I've just made wouldn't go into the presentation. So, right, that's it. I've got 12 minutes left. I thought I'd have about 20, so fortunately, I didn't try and cram too much into this talk. I mean, I could have talked about these things. Look at this. Networking this is why people think it's complicated, because people start from this stuff. Look, I could talk about breaking networking. You're probably not going to blow up networking. Probably. I could talk about chairs, but nobody should talk about chairs. That prefab should be deleted. Just get rid of the code. It doesn't make any sense. Why is it when you set people to be from standing to seated, it works and it transfers them to one location to the other? When you go from seated to standing, it doesn't undo it. What? Why can you leave a chair and get someone stuck in the world? And, yes. So I ranted at the end of my last talk about weird things in networking. If I do a talk next time about chairs and Udon, it means they fix chairs, and I think we all want chairs to be fixed. So put your cannies in about stupid chair bugs. Anyway. I'm going to say this is the start of the Q&A section, so if people want to move over to the Q&A point to ask questions. We've got 12 minutes. Please do so. If we get through all the questions, I'm going to go. If somebody wants to know about any of these, go down there and just say, hey, talk about this topic. And I can go over it in like a minute or a minute and a half, okay? We got 11 minutes to go for questions. Rubik, go. Actually, PT, sorry, first. PT, go.
Oh,
is PT going or Rubik?
It is. Oh. Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Yes, this might be a really noob question. Okay, this might be a really noob question, but is the on serialization, is that like something that your computer's shooting across the network?
Yes, that's what serialization means. Serialization just means you're doing the virtual act of taking a look out the window, seeing sky is blue, writing sky is blue on a piece of paper, and then shipping it to somebody else so they know the sky is blue in your location. That's all that means.
Okay. So,
it's just taking data which is arbitrary and putting it into ones and zeros.
Okay, cool. That's all I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Panda, you suggested earlier that when owners send pre-serialization, they also ask for handle serialization. Is there a cost to asking for handling serialization on the owner's
handling
side?
serialization's an arbitrary piece of code that you might want to write. It just means that if you're writing when you write out send data to other people, don't write like your read code in like the same block of code and do sort of weird things for the owner. Have it so that the code that sits inside of I want to do something with this data I've got is the same for everybody, and have it as an event everybody calls. So basically you have it so write works in one way and read works in another, and once you've finished writing you do a read. Don't try and mush them together. And that means your code will stay nice and stable and clean. So handle serialization is the private function I use for this, but you can use like a public function, another Udon behavior, whatever you like for this. It's just terminology rather than a specific thing that Udon supports.
Follow-up question, is there a possibility that when you handle the serialization on yourself, get different results that other users, like the non-owners, would get?
Yeah, because you could actually have a situation where your serialization could fail. Remember, there's that failed flag and post-serialization. You could have a situation where the network is completely overloaded because you've used BD's image synchronization prefab, and maybe that's caused too much spam, or the Mercury's in retrograde and there's loads of spam in your world because there's a spammy prefab. There's always a chance that stuff will not match up. But you can minimize that via, say, having it on pre-serialization instead, or only firing the code if you successfully serialize. You should have on post-serialization, check to see if it successfully worked first, and then do a handle on your end, or just call your read code. Only run your read code if it's actually been dispatched correctly. That's not a guarantee. Nothing is guaranteed in network systems. It's the nature of distributed computing. Nothing is ever guaranteed. Stuff will always fail. And you've got to handle that in weird ways on your end. But it's the best chance we've got. It's a really good change, the result system. I really quite like it.
Does that mean that if the owner, in case they were to fail on their end, could it be also possible that they only were to fail on their end and that remote users could potentially have a success in the serialization? So like,
no.
Do you have to check
serialization's a two-part process. You serialize and you deserialize. So if you have to write the letter and then send the letter, and then other people receive the letter. So if you fail to write the letter, people cannot receive the letter you haven't written. You haven't sent it to the postman yet. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
FaZe.
So I've tried sending 50,000 network events at once. Are you sure that they're still unreliable after UNO?
I always say that if it isn't given on a piece of paper on the VRChat database, or the VRChat, it is not sent. There's such a thing as a guarantee. It's a networking thing. I have never been directly guaranteed that an event is at least once delivery. My understanding is it's always been at most once, and at that point, as a server engineer and a network engineer, I cannot tell you it's reliable, because if there's any scope for it to be dropped by a normally operating system, it is by definition not reliable. It may be dropped. It may not arrive at the destination. It probably does. In fact, it almost certainly does from my testing as well, but I cannot say it definitely will do. If they want to do the documentation, say it's a guaranteed at least once delivery, then you'll shut people like me up who are being pedants about it. But you're quite right, I'm being a bit pedantic here. It probably will arrive.
Okay, you're fair. That's fair.
At least once, at most once delivery.
Exactly what?
Yeah.
From what I've seen.
Exactly once, yeah, but you can't guarantee that over the internet. It's just not possible. Table! We have 7 minutes left. Keep your questions quick.
Not a question. I understood it.
Yeah.
The talk was a success. If people understood it, the talk was a success. I'm really hopeful that people, I made a joke, if people watch this on YouTube in 6 months and get something out of it, that's successful. Quick shout outs, by the way, while I've got this. 2 people. Vogan VR on YouTube. If this gets TLX talk, please add this to the description of the video. It'd be really nice. Vogan VR's YouTube channel is full of useful tutorials for Udon. It will have a bunch of networking stuff. I can really recommend the official VRChat documentation. It's dramatically better than it used to be. And it was already pretty alright for SDK2 stuff. They're doing videos now. Momo's put a lot of work into it. I know the devs are doing that really seriously now. Really good initiative. Really shout out. Official VRChat channel. The 2 videos on there. Hopefully there's more in the future. Vogan, 6 minutes.
Hello, yeah. So we don't have synced instantiation in SDK3, and object tools can only handle what you set it up to do to some extent.
I have 6 minutes is a big one.
Yeah. Why does the Illuminati say we can't synced instantiate?
Because synced instantiation is very network intensive and is very and remember when I said about lack of guarantees? Instantiation is terrible and you should never do it in video games anyway. Instantiation is an incredibly good way of causing your system to either run out of memory, crash, and just shit out in various ways, as is destroy. Video games are written mostly in C++, where you do a bunch of instantiation destroying. Why do you people use this language? You're idiots. Use a better language. But anyway, sorry, rant. I'm a Go developer. I'm always in the rant about C++. I have to use it at work for Unreal. It's shit. But yeah, we can't use synced instantiation. What I can recommend is trying to use a pool of synced object pool objects. What I do currently is I'm using a synced pool of just generic Udon syncer work, which is syncing positions. Just using object pool, using an object pool and then using inside of that a VRC object sync, and then just have that. What we can actually do then is you have like 1,000 of those, and then just assign stuff from the pool whenever you want to instantiate somebody, and just assign that as a child, and then do some work to like swapping the child and parent around when stuff gets moved around between ownership. And that actually works astonishingly well. Please go check out my test world, VRC Object. There's a test world on my avatar right now called 8 Pool Tables, Praise Danley, whatever it's called. That has that system in. It's really effective. If anybody wants that code, I will happily send them to them just straight up, just fire it over to them. It will be on GitHub in a couple of weeks. Tech.
For those who don't know, what does Mercury in retrograde actually mean?
It's a reference to Mercury in retrograde is a euphemism for shit happens. You know how like we all thought that the world worked one way and then somebody sneezed in China, and then the world changed very differently. Mercury in retrograde is like astrology, right? You're always trying to read the stars when you're networking. You can never be quite guaranteed about stuff working, or if somebody slices a cable in the Atlantic or something weird, you can never be quite sure about things. So you have to build in what's referred to as redundancy and like keep alive systems and stuff. Thankfully, video games often are not on the front end of this because you guys get to use fun libraries and I get to write them. But yeah, that's all that meant. It's just because shit happens on the network. Momo.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think about a signaling system that could theoretically be built into events, into synced variables, so that rather than having to check your own deltas on a variable, is my local version different than this new networked version? If there'd be a way for a variable to instead declare, hey, I know I'm a new version, and here's an actual
you're dirty,
flow out, etc.
That would be
your thoughts on that.
It would be very handy. It would save me a few lines of code. It wouldn't be incredibly useful, but it would be handy, particularly for new players. For me, it's a case of I can very easily write that code myself and just store private variables. And I think there's value in having your write and read being separate variables anyway. So you're only mutating your old data until you want to serialize, you update your new data. Who here's CQRS? I'm going to quickly say that buzzword. That's my $10 word for the day. Shout out to Greg Young. But yeah, so it's useful definitely for new players, not for me, but definitely could be useful, I think. It depends how it would use. I'm sure I could think of a good use for it, personally. Thanks. I've got 2 minutes left, so
thank you for the talk. That was wonderful. I learned so much. You better all cheer at the end. How do you think the upcoming persistence features will change how we do networking?
I've got 2 minutes! How am I supposed to answer that in 2 minutes, Thanks?
I'm sorry!
Okay, I have said this before. There's a philosophical argument for saying that there's a very good argument saying Udon networking is the best thing to happen to Udon since it came out. And Udon was one of the best things to happen to VRChat since VRChat came out. Persistence is the biggest and most important, incredibly important thing for VRChat, period, because it goes from being a world about effervescent things that die when you leave and you don't look at them anymore, to places that physically exist on a hard drive somewhere. And the philosophical advantages of that are so big, I could spend an entire talk coming up with cool ideas. But for now, I will make it... No, I've only got 2 minutes. I will just say a world which is an example of persistence and why it'd be important over the network. Being able to go into any instance of a copy of old school RuneScape's Lumbridge instance, chop down a tree, gain experience, and just be able to do that in any instance and get to level 99 woodcutting. Over like 55 instances, and be able to have like a woodcutting code when you go into the world. Very simple example. Incredibly important feature. I will do a talk on persistence when it comes out. I promise. Either the TLX immediately afterwards or the TLX that comes to afterwards. I will do a talk on persistence and how to use it. I swear, it's a hugely exciting system. I can't read your username. Sorry. I know I've met you before.
Cyrix, thank you.
Cyrix.
Panda,
Cyrix.
excellent talk to begin with. Looking through this, I saw the last point you have there, using string or bytes arrays to create event buffers.
That's an entire hour by itself again.
Oh my god, I want to know.
Am I allowed to stretch on my talk for a couple of minutes to say? Udon string events was the first thing I wrote to get into prefabs via Udon chat. So I think it's fun to end on this topic. FaZe is kind of already doing this, sending over serialized information using an event buffer, and that's actually what the pool table uses. It serialized things into a byte array. It used to. It doesn't do anymore because I got rid of that code because it was completely pointless. But it used to serialize things into a big string and send it over the database to send events out. Event buffers and doing that kind of thing is what video games normally do. They do like they have like read heads of like events that have happened. Have they shipped this yet? Ship these ones. The next frame ship these ones and that kind of stuff. Really, really powerful. And basically, I'm going to write Udon string events 2 eventually to do this, which is going to be a really cool system, but that's a few weeks out. I've got a prototype of USC 2 in my code base right now, and I'm working on my Between Uncertain Stars system. Watch this space. I will have a prefab out for it at some point. I've got no minutes left, but I do want to get Shaggy in if I've got a bit of time. Shaggy, really quick question?
Yeah, we can do a quick question.
Yeah.
No question. I just want you to check your Twitter.
Oh no.
Oh, by the way, there was a terrible curse as a child. I got bitten by an arcade machine, so just 1 second.
Oh no.
Check my Twitter.
Arcade machine.
By a radioactive arcade machine.
Shaggy sent me something on Twitter. Let's just see what it is.
Also, thanks for calling out on my internet.
Oh, did he send you a Mogus?
Thank you, Shaggy.
I love this. I saw it.
So I guess that means I have to end this talk with the immortal, the immortal thing. Where is it? It's here. I'm gonna change avatar on stage. See how horrible this breaks. Just do this. Come in like this, and then just. We've got 5. Oh, guys, already on. Mogus. Mogus.
All right,
Thank you very much, everybody.